Good evening, all. Good evening. My name is Michael Morris. I am a graduate of the School of Veterinary Medicine, 1995, and I am a lecturer at the vet school right now. I'd like to say a pleasant good night to Professor Terence Simangal, Dean of the Faculty of Medical Sciences, Dr. Carla Georges, Director of the School of Veterinary Medicine, Dr. Lana Yan, Acting Chief Veterinary Officer of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Stacy Raghubar, President of Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association, Dr. Saeed Rahman, Director of Veterinary Public Health, fellow veterinary professionals, my colleagues. A special welcome to the future veterinary professionals, our vet students from years 1 to 5. And I would also like to welcome our overseas resident vets who have made the time to attend. I know Dr. Sibran Singh is here. I know Dr. Board was about to come, Dr. Kunji Singh. And I know as this affects them as well. Some of our senior eminent colleagues have also come, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Casabon. Thank you for attending. So let me start with this very central point. Things have to change. What we are here tonight to do is to provide suggestions as to the way forward. The draft bill has been circulated, so those suggested changes that provide great cause for alarm need be debated, with concrete alternatives proposed. Major issues are the composition of the board, the criteria for veterinary surgeon registration fees, and disciplinary functions, among other things. So firstly, to the fore, I would like to ask Professor Terence Simangal to say a few words. Professor Simangal.
Good night, Mike. Good night, everyone. I'd like to thank the director for asking me to say a few words to you. It is, of course, a great pleasure for me as the Dean of the faculty to offer my views and to give one or two thoughts that you may consider useful. I am, of course, not a veterinarian. I'm a physician, and I have been president of the medical board of Trinidad and Tobago at some time in the past. And thus, I have some understanding of registration processes as they apply to professionals. The work of the Vet Registration Board is perhaps not unlike that of the medical board in that regard. It is of concern to the faculty. Dr. Morris didn't exactly say so, but my understanding, perhaps a rumor, but the faculty has somehow come to an understanding that there is, or there are views expressed that the graduates of the School of Veterinary Medicine should be required to take an examination before registration. That would be, to us, if it was so, we would like to understand why the members of the veterinary fraternity would believe that that is necessary. The School of Veterinary Medicine has a very proud history of continuous accreditation with the Caribbean Accreditation Authority for Medicine and Allied Health Disciplines. It is a very rigorously run school and has been so for a very long time. We have had no complaints about the standard of our graduates, and several of them have gone on to do postgraduate veterinary medicine. Not just here, but outside of Trinidad and Tobago, which speaks to the quality of their degree. It is also a difficult task if you are to give a fair assessment of such a person. It is an onerous task. It is a task that is very costly to us as a faculty. The vet school invites a large number of external examiners in each discipline of veterinary medicine to oversee the exit and several of their end of year examination, but in particular, the exiting examination sat by the final year students. In fact, they invite far more than the medical school. And the university makes every attempt to ensure that there is a high standard. And a lot of rigor for the final examinations. So you will understand if we feel somewhat disturbed that despite what is a very expensive effort, people may feel otherwise, but we are of course willing to listen and to learn from whatever views we may choose to express here. The School of Veterinary Medicine, like several of our other clinical schools, but in particular the School of Veterinary Medicine, speaks to something that is now becoming quite fundamental in the health sciences. And that is the social accountability of a clinical school. And by that we mean the accountability of a clinical school to the society that funds the school. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago set the veterinary school up in 1989 and has continued, 1987, it would have, but the first students would have come in between 89 and 90. And they have supported the school all the way, and the school has responded to that support by a tremendous, Carla will probably be able to give you all of the details, but if you are interested, of course, number of contributions to the management of veterinary diseases and veterinary public health here in Trinidad and Tobago. For example, I know that there is an outbreak of, now Carla, I'm really, really sorry. There's an outbreak in one of the other islands. Which is the island?
African swine fever in Dominican Republic.
In Dominica, that's right. African swine fever in Dominica.
Dominican Republic.
The Dominican Republic. Oh, that's further north than I thought. And she has been called. She has been called about it. It is because of the reputation of the school, a solid reputation. We are very proud of the School of Veterinary Medicine. Now, let us just take a little look at other schools here. The medical school produces doctors every year, and there is no examination required of them other than the final examination in the medical school. The School of Dentistry, their graduates are required to sit a dental council examination. But when they do a one-year apprenticeship after graduation, they are excused from that examination. Optometry, 9 years old in this faculty, more than that in the university, but 9 years old in this faculty. When their students graduate, they are not required to do any examination. Pharmacy, the same. So you will understand my concern if I hear something like this. So of course, the school is here to listen and they will no doubt report back to the faculty. But we would like to encourage our colleagues in the fraternity to think carefully about that and what it says and what it means to our graduates. I think it is usual that in the Caribbean at least, that when we invest in a school and the school has maintained a high standard, we would not expect to have to exert any more pressure from the point of view of examinations on the graduates of that school. People from outside, yes, of course. They must meet the criteria that we think necessary. The same is true in the UK, for instance. So I'll leave it there. But again, I would like to commend the school for the tremendous work it has been doing in this country. And I look forward to many more years of the school contributing with the excellence that it has to the work of the Faculty of Medical Sciences. Thank you all very much.
Hello, Whoops.
And finally, and most importantly, to you, my veterinary colleagues, for whom this meeting was specially prepared. I'd like to welcome everyone again. I'm delighted at the high turnout. Our Veterinary Surgeons Act has been on the back burner for far, far too long. In the Act, we wish to incorporate things like code of ethics, and this will definitely improve and raise our standards. Things like CE credits, limiting what non-vets could do, punishing people that do veterinary work when they're not supposed to, sale of pharmaceutical drugs by pet stores, annual registration fees, and having to write another final exam by UE grads are all going to be addressed. I feel very strongly that veterinarians should be the makers, the sculptors of this act. So it's time to speak up, give your opinion, and mold this act so that it could shape the future of our profession. This is the time to consolidate all the discussions, opinions, and arguments that have popped up in relation to this bill. And that's it. I just would like to welcome Dr. Carla Georges, the Director of the School of Veterinary Medicine, for a short PowerPoint presentation. Dr. Georges, I hand it over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So good afternoon, everybody. And this is indeed a pleasure to have such a very strong turnout. And we are delighted to know the interest that this act has generated. And we hope for a very meaningful discussion as we divide the body of participants into groups, with moderators. At the end of my presentation, there'll be a poll which we like you to please participate. I will try to be brief. So what I have done is that I have put the act into some short snippets and with a few recommendations. So it's divided into, as you know, the act itself is divided into parts, and each part has a title and with sections. So I will briefly highlight some of the parts, each of the parts, and some of the important sections. And before that, I'm just going to go through just a little bit about the background of the school, and we're delighted that Professor Sim Mungal gave us such information, which I can now just build on a bit. As we know, the school is fully accredited, and Professor Mungal elucidated to that, and we have five professional schools within the faculty, and the School of Veterinary Medicine is one of the first professional schools, along with the School of Medicine and the School of Dentistry. The practice of veterinary medicine in Trinidad and Tobago is regulated by the Veterinary Surgeons Registration Act. So our current act was last revised in 1963. And it's important to note that was an era of change, an era of revolution within the Caribbean region, where you had the Federation and the Commonwealth as a global body taking a lot of action within the world. So the last act you would see, the last amendment took place during that era of change, 1963, to include Commonwealth schools within the, graduates from Commonwealth schools within the Act. So the Act of Other Professionals Bodies in Trinidad and Tobago is also regulated by their own acts. You can find it on the Ministry of Legal Affairs. And if you look at the Dental Professions Act, it was last amended in 1999, and the Medical Board Act in 2007. So there has been a lot of change for the other two professionals within our school, okay? We know that veterinary medicine has evolved. The practice of veterinary medicine in Trinidad and Tobago has evolved considerably, let's say since I graduated in 1995 to now. And you know that the breadth of modern practice is demonstrated by just looking at yourselves and where you are. Some of us are in large animal practice, public health, regulatory, medicine, food safety, academia, biomedical research, and even other areas just outside but related to veterinary medicine. So we have to take all of these into account. So as I said before, the changes in practice of veterinary medicine since 1930s, and then of course the 60s is very significant. So we, as our president says, the president of the TTVA, I'm a member, so my president says, we strongly endorse the intent to introduce a modern fit-for-purpose act and with all the accompanying regulations, because this is necessary and of course we need to respond to it. But we have to kind of take a little bit of self-reflection. We as a veterinary fraternity, what do we wish to accomplish? The veterinary fraternity is the board. The board is not an elusive set of members that come drop out of the sky. They are basically part of us. We are part, we have to be able to say what we wish for the board. And at certain times, we have to be part of that regulatory body because the board cannot do everything. So the board is depending on us to be part of the maybe subcommittees that have to be formed in order to move forward. Again, the board itself has to have a vision and mission. These have to be articulated. We have to be able to have core values. So all of these things need to be articulated and put together in order to have a fit for purpose act or legislation. Okay, so I went into earlier what these sections are. So just to put you into context, we have 6 parts and a schedule. So these schedules have to be, of course, improved on and probably added to. And within each part, there are sections, and a lot of these sections have titles, okay? So for those of you who want to read it, if you get that in your if you put it into that context, it might be easier to look at. So we're going to go through some of the parts and I'm going to highlight some of the areas. Okay, so just the citation. If you look at the citation that is proposed, it just says an act to regulate the practice of veterinary medicine. And we believe, or we would like to think that the act should be, the citation should be a little bit broader and should provide for the, so you want to say something to the effect to provide for the management of the veterinary profession, for registration of surgeons. You want to include the allied professionals, and regulate practice and conduct, okay? And of course, so we think it should have, be a little bit broader. So the general section just defines what is a veterinary surgeon and all of the other terms of the act. It does not define what a paraprofessional is. So if we want to include paraprofessionals, we need to define explicitly what paraprofessionals are we talking about, okay? Is it going to be veterinary nurses, veterinary technicians, etc. So these must be, these professions must be well defined, okay? And as it is we need to say, should we have different classes of registration? For instance, is someone who is abroad living for 20 years, should they pay the same fees? Should there be a different class of registration? Should there be a temporary registration? So all of these things have not been spoken about. And related services, we need to also say what does related services mean, okay? So all of these things have to be explained. So when again, we look at the Veterinary Surgeons Registration Board, that's a very important body. And as I said, the board comes from the members, the people who register to practice veterinary medicine. And the actions of the board and the ability of the board to function will, of course, comes from the voluntary contribution of the membership of the board, of the registrants, people who, like yourselves, who are registered to practice. Okay, so we know that a comprehensive regulatory framework is key to maintaining public trust. So of course, we need to change the legislation, because part of it is protecting the public good, the public trust, and that has to be self-regulated. We want to optimize the quality of service delivery, and therefore the composition of the board must represent a mixture of persons who we believe can lead that sort of change. So the current act says, asks for just 6 members, and of course that's an even number. So of course we need, it's best practice that the board should have an odd number of members. And the current act just asks for 3 members from TTVA. And it doesn't really expand on the composition of the board and the admixture of persons who really should be on the board. And if you look at the other veterinary acts throughout the world, throughout the Commonwealth, you will notice that the councils contains mixtures of other professions and interests. So we are proposing, it should be about 9 members. And how these members are nominated is up for discussion. We were saying maybe 6 by the minister, 3 are veterinary surgeons with the CVU, someone in knowledge in animal related or food production, horses, etc. Other animals, maybe exotics, and we're thinking that somebody from welfare, a legal practitioner, and maybe a lay person. But this is not cast in stone. But what we're saying is that the board must have a mixture of different professionals and different opinions. And of course, one of the highlights is that all the other professional acts have members of the University of the West Indies as members of the board. So the School of Veterinary Medicine, I think, we believe at this time, must have members nominated to the current board. And of course, we agree that the Veterinary, to Trinidad and Tobago Veterinary Association must have members onto the current board, onto the board. So, rationale for this, of course, as Professor Simanga alluded to, the UE has a wide range of professional expertise, and we are always, at most times, called upon to give opinion for matters relating to food safety, public health, diseases, wildlife protection, many legal changes in other professions, etc. So therefore, this is one of the criteria that we feel must be included, that we be members of the board. So we would like to make this provision with immediate effect. So at present, the Act only regulates the practice of veterinary surgery, and therefore we believe, as I said earlier, the Act should also regulate additional professions with the aim of perfecting animal and human health. And this is where we ask for the Act to regulate the practice of the allied professions. Okay, and we know that we have to work with these allied professionals, because we know that there are activities carried out of this group which are beneficial to animal health, animal welfare, and public health. We have to ensure that association with the group wouldn't damage the reputation of the veterinary professionals. And we have to ensure that any paraprofessionals, they operate under the oversight of a veterinary professional. The professions within this group has to be, of course, a cohesive body, okay? Right now, and also we want to include in the Act some sort of body responsible for regulating veterinary practice standards, okay, itself. Okay, so what we say that the regulation of the practice of veterinary medicine must promote health and welfare and ensuring the protection of the general public. We have to preserve and maintain professional status and the integrity of the veterinary surgeons and allied professionals. And we have to be able to, at some point, determine the qualification and experience of an applicant for maybe temporary registration or or whatever else we believe is necessary to be able to practice in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so the board has to be able to keep a book or register of the persons in the act, should be able to prescribe the code of ethics. So that is where different committees have to be formed and constituted from the membership of the board, from among yourselves, monitoring, adhere to breaches of conduct and rules of discipline under the act. And the board should be able to prescribe penalties in respect of any contravention thereof. So therefore, the board has to be able to, in order for the board to be able to do all these things, the board has to have oversight over several committees, which will there function with the board. So, and we also would believe that the board should have the oversight of appointing and defining duties of examiners of candidates other than the examination conducted by a tertiary level institution. The board should be able to supervise the holding of examinations as currently is done by the Veterinary Board in Jamaica. And we should have established standards for conducting continuing professional education and training in respect of persons under the Act. Okay, so we agree that some sort of CE must be in place and they have to have standards for all of this. So we should, of course, keep a book of register of persons registered to practice. The board should promote the interests of the professions in any manner that the board seeks to fit, and the board should, of course, be able to advise the minister on amendments of laws and be able to perform any other functions that the law gives the board to do. Okay, so at this time, the board should, of course, state that no person or person should be permitted to or manage any veterinary surgery practice unless it's under the immediate supervision and control of a registered professional and who shall be responsible for carrying out the operations of the practice in compliance with the Act. Okay, so whoever has a practice should have it in compliance or under supervision of a registered professional. So the current Act also proposes in Part 2 the issuing of license, suspension of license, add and removal of names, which is commonplace, make rules or regulations, and they were saying hold property. So if you at some point in contravention with any of the regulations, this current Act proposes that the board should be able to confiscate property and determine fees. So what we are saying, okay, so I have that in red. Do you agree with that or not? No rule or regulation can come into force or have effect until it's approved by the minister. So we are saying that the board's regulations, there should be some kind of oversight over the type of regulations by the board, and of course, it should of course be gazetted. Okay, so the current Act proposes in terms of tenure of office of the board, no, a member shall hold office for a period of 3 years and shall be eligible for reappointment, right? So what we are saying that the board membership should be for a fixed term and not for life. Members should be allowed a maximum maybe of 2 consecutive terms, and we should have election to the board like others do to their councils. So, and we also believe that the nominations to a board must be clear and transparent and accompanied by minutes of meetings. Okay, the current act also proposes for the quorum, there should be 4 members. We say no, you should always have an odd number. So we are saying you need to change this to maybe 5 members when you have a quorum. Okay, so let's look at part 3, which is registration. So the current act proposes that to apply to the board, to get registered, you apply to the board and you pay a prescribed fee of $5,000, and then you satisfy the requirements under the act. So this fee of $5,000 is one of the criteria that you need to do. So the current act proposes that you supply the evidence of the qualifications of the applicant, proof of identity, and prove that the applicant is a fit and proper person. So what do we mean by fit and proper person? And should have a certificate of good standing and any such information that the board may require. And it also proposes that an applicant should hold a degree granted by the University of a School of Veterinary Medicine that in the opinion of the board is evidence of satisfactory training. Okay, so as with most other countries, we believe that there must be a clear and transparent mechanism to assess programs. So the board should have a committee that is dedicated, or be able to form a committee among its members, which will be you, the veterinary profession, to have that, to be able to investigate schools, look at curricula, etc. Okay, so there must be a clear and transparent mechanism to assess programs. Okay, and then of course the board, this current act says has passed a qualifying examination administered by a body approved by the Veterinary Surgeons Board as prescribed in Schedule 1. So Schedule 1 is what Dean Professor Mungal was alluding to, such as the Royal College exam, the program for assessment of veterinary education equivalents, maybe the ECFVG, which is the Educational Commission for Foreign Veterinary Graduates, and the Basic and Clinical Sciences Examination, which is there's a number of steps in that, and the NAVLE. So there are a number of steps there. So we think, of course, that the proposal to require that applicants pass a qualifying examination approved or administered by a body approved by the board, and it's from that list is incomprehensible to, and of course should not even be considered. Okay, so what this current act is telling us is that Trinidad and Tobago nationals, after pursuing 5 years of costly education at local taxpayers' expense, will be unable to practice professionally in this jurisdiction. So that is what this current legislation is proposing. And just to let you know that even so, even if you want to propose this, that these requirements are not something that you can just submit an email and say, give me a form to write the exam. No. So the requirement for AVMA to be AVMA listed is that the graduates from the school must be eligible to register and practice without restriction in the country where the school is located. So the School of Veterinary Medicine is AVMA listed because we are on the world list of veterinary schools, and to get there, our Minister of Education has to write to them to state that the University of the West Indies School of Veterinary Medicine graduates are eligible to practice in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so that's the genesis. So this act cannot even consider having such a regulation. So, and even if the proponents wanted it, it will suggest something that the local market could only be accessible to graduates from the UK or North America, right? And no other country in the world has ever proposed this. With a School of Veterinary Medicine in their own country has ever proposed this on their citizens, okay? So just be clear. So what we want to say in response to that, we would recommend that you hold a diploma, degree, or certificate or other status from a university which is accredited by your local accreditation council, and CAMHP, which is what we are at this moment. We are CAMHP accredited, which is a very rigorous and expensive exercise that some of you as students who were in school at the time when this was happening would have been part and parcel of this procedure. So you understand what the school goes through for accreditation. Okay, so I just want to ask if you could just close all your cameras, please. Thank you. So the recommendation, so we think that if the board has to, of course, if you have applications outside of the jurisdiction where candidates wish to apply, that there should be some mechanism recognized by the board to allow assessment of these citizens. So yes, people from other countries, once they satisfy that regulation where you examine the curriculum, it has to be a rigorous regulation. And if they satisfy, then fine, they should be able to practice. Okay, so we think that okay, so the board is also saying a person who was registered as a veterinary surgeon under a former act prior to the commencement of this act shall be entitled to be registered without application. So the board is giving you a little bit of a grandfather clause in it, right? For those of us who already graduated. And I just want to say that an act cannot exclude any graduates from the University of the West Indies, past or present, because it will negatively impact on every one of us who have graduated from this institution since 1994, okay? So what we propose is that any change or any new act must list the University of the West Indies School of Veterinary Medicine in any schedule of graduates or who are eligible to practice as the Medical Act of Trinidad and Tobago for the medical professionals, and the Dental Council Act of Trinidad and Tobago for graduates from the University of the West Indies from the School of Dentistry. Okay, so we should be in line with what is taking place with all the other professionals in this country. Okay, so the current act also proposes that in terms of continuing education, that the applicant should have some sort of, in Part B, satisfy some evidence of continuing education. And we recommend that, yes, we agree with that, CE should be in place, but it needs to be more clearly defined, and what are the minimum number of CE credits, and who will we consider as a preferred provider of CE credits, okay? Because with the advent of the internet, you have all levels of providers, and we just want to make sure that is not some sort of predatory CE credit provider that people are logging on to, okay? So the current act proposes that no person who is not registered shall directly or indirectly practice veterinary medicine or hire gain for hope or reward. And we want to say that worldwide, as you know, veterinary medicine is changing a lot, and there are corporate entities which own practices. Should we recognize that under the Act? So this is something that we may want to consider. Okay. The current Act proposes that prohibits when a person for a person to be registered, for a person to practice, if who's not registered, if you are under direction or supervision of a surgeon, or under such service under authority and the supervision of any person so registered or licensed if permitted to authorize such practice. So direction and supervision, I know again with the age of the electronic age, we should very well clarify what it is. Are we going to allow remote supervision? What are we saying exactly? Okay, so I think that has to be clear. Validity and revocation of a veterinary surgeon's license. The current act states that among other things, that the veterinary surgeon's license issued under this part shall remain valid for 2 years unless revoked. So when you pay your $5,000, your license is valid for 2 years. Are you in agreement with this or not? Okay, what do you believe should be the duration of your validity after when you pay your fees? So the current act says that when a veterinary surgeon license has been revoked under section 20, that the holder of such license may only apply for re-registration after a period of 3 years. So again, we found that was a little draconian, and maybe it should not be a fixed term, and maybe there should be a recommendation by a disciplinary committee, and you have different levels of discipline and different terms of reference and charges to suit the infringements that occur. And then when I look at the other sections, as I said, this is just a summary. We look at Schedule 2, which hasn't been formulated, which is the form of the license, the display, additional qualifications, and the veterinary surgeon's register. Okay, so the current act says they'll keep a register and have the names in the register for each person. And we are saying that the register should be able to, in some way or format, recognize specialists, veterinarians abroad, maybe, as we said, the paraprofessionals, maybe student interns, do we wish this? And of course, academics here working under, let's say, the School of Veterinary Medicine, but unable, but maybe precluded from practicing veterinary surgery outside of that jurisdiction. Okay, so I move on now to part 4, which is the discipline. As I said, several committees, in order for the board to be able to perform its functions, several committees will have to be constituted, and those committees will be from the membership, from you, the professionals who are registered to practice. So as with all other jurisdictions. So we have an ethics committee, again, should be a committee formed by the board, but you shouldn't have the board, should not be on the ethics committee. So again, we spoke about levels of fines, which should be clearly defined. And when we look at offenses and penalties, I'll move forward quickly. The board needs to appoint a disciplinary committee with a clear terms of reference. That's what we said. And then miscellaneous, they looked at regulations and funding. So when you pay this money to register for veterinary, to be a veterinary, to practice vet medicine in Trinidad and Tobago, we need to find out specifically, should there be parliamentary scrutiny of it? Would the funds that are collected be available to the board? So these are the things that we have to think about carefully, okay, and clarify, because of course, the board needs funding to operate, obviously, okay? So this current act didn't clearly address the mechanism for registration paraprofessionals, fees for registration, different tiers of fees, frequency of registration, is it every 2 years? It doesn't clearly address fines or complaints, how are complaints to be handled. Okay, so this presentation was put together through the input of several people. And of course, I have to thank Dr. Simmons, all the staff from the School of Veterinary Medicine who commented on the different sections of the Act. And of course, our good old Wendy and team from Marketing and Communications for facilitating this. And of course, TTVA and members of the executive and the veterinarians of TTVA, and of course our outreach committee who put this together, and you're the moderators who will help with the sessions that will be coming in, that we'll be having soon. So at this time, what we're gonna do is, I'd like to put the poll up. So what we do, we agree for the improvement of the Act. We wanna summarize that, we're not trashing anything. We agree that it has to be approved. We agree that the university must be on the board. And we have to have the School of Veterinary Medicine listed in any schedule of schools, of graduates of schools that are allowed to practice in Trinidad and Tobago. there must be a transparent mechanism for being a membership of the board. And of course, a mechanism for registering the paraprofessionals, and maybe we as veterinarians may have to give more support to that. And of course, more research into the different legislations worldwide is necessary, because obviously some research needed to take place before this draft act was put together. Okay, so I just want to say there are several websites you can look at. Look at our own Ministry of Legal Affairs and what is happening for the professionals in our midst, what's going on. The Dental Council Act, the Medical Professionals Act, even the Nursing Act you can look at. So look at the Vet Surgeons Act of South America. You can look at the New South Wales Act. These are some of the suggestions from School of Veterinary Medicine persons when we will give our comments to the act. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation, and I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm just gonna ask if the poll, if we can put up the poll, and we can go into our groups.
Attendees, which is the most we've ever had for any sort of veterinary meeting in Trinidad, I would assume. Although I suppose a lot of these are students as well, who for this meeting will have a great meaning for their ability to practice and the sort of practice that they're going out to in the future. So, right, share results. Okay.
Yeah, let's share the results. 100% complete?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so the poll results. We have the majority of people going $500 to $1,000. And then about 34% 1,000 to 2,000. 5% of the wealthier ones in our nation are going 2,000 to 3,000, and then 3% 3,000 to 5,000. The USEM must be included in the schedule, and 96% of 214 persons have said that the graduates of SVM should be eligible to practice without having to write additional examinations. There must be regulations controlling where companion animal surgeries are performed. Again, a large majority, 87%. Should there be a requirement to complete continuing education credits in order to renew your veterinary surgeon registration to practice? Again, a large majority, 71%, which is keeping within normal standards, world standards. The regulation of veterinary paraprofessionals must fall under this act. Again, a large majority, 94%. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So what we will do, yeah. So what we're doing now, we go into the rooms, right? So Michael, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So so for all those who have any questions and whatnot, when we come back, we will entertain those. So we'll go to the breakout rooms. You have your moderators. The moderators will take notes, or somebody else could take notes for them. We want this to be your voice, the ability to say things, and to bring up any things that you may not have suggested before when you first saw the draft, and to discuss all these, especially the more salient points which are going to affect all of us. Okay, so you go to the rooms, and then when we'll come back, we'll have the moderators give a synopsis of what went on in their rooms, and then we will finish up the meeting thereafter.
Hi, Carla.
Okay, so
yes.
we could go ahead.
Before I leave, right, so I just needed to make one correction to the PowerPoint that you gave. In the PowerPoint, you stated that the ability of the board to hold property means that they can confiscate your clinic. That is not true. Legally, holding property means the board has the power to rent or lease or own any property they need to for their purposes.
Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Mike, thank you for that that clarification. But that has to be clarified in the board, in the act, so nobody misinterprets it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Wendy, if you can allow us to all go through into the breakout rooms.
Okay, so we could start. Dr. Supal, you want to begin? Rod?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Right, so in terms of what is a reasonable fee, our room decided that annual fee of 500 is best and should be concerned throughout. In terms of the, should UEGRADs be allowed to practice? Should they have to write for an exam? The answer was no throughout. What changes to the proposed legislation? So I'll come with the paraprofessionals. So they wanted to know who would monitor those whose license would be suspended. If there could be a website for registered people, so that it could be looked up every year. Who would monitor those who didn't pay their annual fees? Should there be limits on members of the registration board? So the suggestion was 7 to 9 people. Somebody suggested that we would have only people who would have practiced for a minimum of 5 years as members, but that is up for debate. In terms of recommendations for composition of the board, we suggested that a lawyer, someone to represent the vet techs if they are going to be covered by the act, an auditor. So being a creature of the government, the board may have already an auditing facility. However, if not, well then should have some auditor for the finances to be collected. Recommendations moving forward. So a lot of our discussion was scheduled along paraprofessionals, and it was said that we should list the different types of, so there should be a schedule of the different types or levels of paraprofessionals, the terms used for each people, standards for each level, and their roles and responsibilities. So vet techs, vet assistants, vet nurses. The vet school should probably get into providing training and a qualification for these different levels. All right. And eventually they would also need to have an umbrella body to cover them as well. And what duties they would have to perform at the different places of employment. So other things would be like to control the sale of pharmaceuticals by agri-shops and by vets to non-vets. Right, so another thing that came up was how would non-vets practicing be reported? What type of evidence would be required? Who reports, who these reports should go to, and what is the reporting procedure? And for vets who might not comply with ethical and competency conduct, they need to have the mechanism of reporting should also be outlined more clearly for everyone. The process for non-vets to own a vet clinic should be clearly outlined. And setting of prices for basic services such as vaccines and upper and lower limit. This is just to encourage people to go by vets rather than to seek paraprofessionals. That seems to be it.
Okay, thanks, Rod, for that very extensive list. I'd next like to call on Dr. Mutu.
Good night, everybody. So we started off with the fee structure, and 58% of the group wanted annual fees rather than the tiered system, and we felt that a moratorium should be applied for the new grads where they would not be required to pay registration fees until the second year. And 75% of the group felt that the fee should lie between 1,000 to 2,000, and that should be an annual fee. 100% of the group felt that SVM grads should not have to do any foreign licensing examinations. We were in agreement with the uneven number of members to the board, and we had some questions as to what exactly would this board be doing with the money received for from these annual fees. Whether there would be proper accountability and regulation with concerns of unethical behavior and recourse and follow through and penalties being imposed and so on. That's one of the things that we wanted clarified. With regard to the limit of the board, there was a question as to whether the board should run the course of the government, but some felt that that may bring some sort of political collusion into question, so perhaps not. Recommendations, we were all 100% agreement of CE being a requirement for practice and for both clinical and non-clinical areas. We wanted clarification moving forward on how paraprofessionals would be regulated. And one suggestion was that the School of Veterinary Medicine should mount a course for veterinary technicians so that you'd have specialization in, for example, anesthesia techs and so on. Because we felt that in the large animal area, with UTT having the diploma in animal health and veterinary public health, I think that was the name of it, that perhaps the large animal area might be covered better in terms of some sort of paraprofessional training. But we felt that on the small animal clinical area, there's a gap that needs to be filled, and the vet school could play a role there. We wanted clarification with regard to cases that were coming up for ethical misconduct, whether the registration board would now be that regulating body with fielding cases from TTVA that may be raising the red flag. So we wanted some clarification there. And we also felt that the registration board could make recommendations for, apart from basic fee guidance for surgeries and that sort of thing, but with regards to salaries, especially in the case of new grads coming out and so. And there was also a question with regard to how house call veterinarians would be monitored and regulated, whether we needed to consider once again all veterinarians having some sort of ID that is, you know, that the registration board would provide, right? So that there would be a means of identifying a vet, whether it's a house call vet or not. I think that pretty much is it from my group.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mutu. Mark Driscoll, Dr. Driscoll.
Hi, hello. All right, so similarly, the fee, we had said 500 to 1,000 every year or every 2 years, because there was still some debate as to whether it would be an annual or biennial fee. But we were mostly in agreement with 1,000 per year, and new graduates would pay 500 for their first year. There was also a discussion on whether the tiered approach could also apply to the older vets. So, you know, you're in practice, so you're 65 and over, where you may be doing less work, but still doing something, whether there could be a reduced fee for vets in that age bracket. So that was a suggestion that was made. Again, the purposes of this fee, we do know that it is to assist the board in the management of what it has to do. There was some debate on the need for a physical space to do these things, but we were leaning toward at least some kind of office space, if not an entire building for the board. That was the main suggestions from the fees perspective. As for the UE graduates, generally, yes, UE graduates should not have to write an additional exam, but the suggestion made by Dr. Georges is supported, where the Act specifies which accredited schools, or rather can be accepted. So once you are accredited by the ACTT, CAM-HP, and we suggested RCVS or AVMA, you can practice without having to write those additional exams. And therefore, anybody who is not from a school so accredited will then have to write one of the examinations listed. Well, I should say pass the examination listed in order to be eligible to practice here. So that was our suggestion. As for continuing education, we suggest that the details could be included in a schedule, but definitely it is important to be put in the act. Generally, we had some debate on that, where some of the members figured that 10 to 20 hours per year would be enough, but we were reminded that RCVS is 35 hours per year. So maybe more 20 to 30 might be the numbers we could look at. Strong suggestion that whatever the numbers are, an individual be able to upload their credits to the board in a more continuous fashion as compared to just having to come every year and say, I've done this amount. But then we will need guidance as to, you know, what form these credits should take, whether there be a certified list of providers. So that is some suggestions for moving forward, how we'll define those CE credits. For the animal health assistants, agreed it should be treatments only, no surgery should be performed, full stop. But there is a need to list the duties very specifically as to what they can and can't do. And therefore, based on that, yes, the paraprofessionals should be governed by this act, but have their duties listed. And then whether there's an approach, if you're a technician versus a health assistant versus simply a vet assistant, will have to be built in, and then the training for those considered as well. Yes, we agree to there being a limit on the number of terms of members. We said there should be 2 consecutive terms. The question as to the compensation package, if, you know, what should these board members make as a stipend, we figure that we should find out what kind of stipend or remuneration other board members enjoy on other medical boards and what have you, and spell out the duties of those individuals, because all of that would also inform the annual registration fee, whether, you know, 1,000 per year is enough, too much, etc. For the composition of the board, we do agree, again, an odd number. Our group suggested 7 members, supporting 2 from SVM, 2 from TTVA, 1 Legal Mind, and then the other 2 can be discussed as well. And definitely in support of a minimum pricing guide to prevent the undercutting of our community. And that's mostly it for our group. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. Paul, Dr. Crooks.
Good night, everyone. Okay, so my group had a lot of the suggestions that were made already, but I do want to go over some of the specifics. My group did mention the possibility of first-year graduates, wherever they may be graduates from. If it's their first year after graduation, they should pay reduced fees. And that we should also consider reduced fees for those who are over the age of 65. Additionally, it was suggested that fees should be reviewed every 3 years. So rather than have one fee set in stone, that we could set a fee now and then every 3 years revisit. Additionally, the recommendation for a minimum price guide for some of the more common procedures that was supported generally, but also should be reviewed every 3 years. The point was made, like, for example, now with COVID, look at the changes in prices of ketamine, for example, that would have to be factored into what prices are set or what prices are recommended. What should be required for approval of vets to practice? The group agreed that every international graduate should sit a local examination, and that SVM graduates, of course, should be exempt from that, as the exam will be set by the SVM, is the guess. as far as continuing education being a requirement, yes, we didn't know enough in our group as to make recommendations for numbers of hours, but we did say that the whatever hours are recommended, there should be easily accessible and available continuing education to fulfill those requirements, that the board and or the vet school should make it that whatever hours are set for continuing education, they are able to be fulfilled very easily. Regarding paraprofessionals, they all should be defined in the Act, as well as clear scopes of work. Regarding animal health assistants in particular, if historically they had been hired to fill the gaps where vets were not able to work, perhaps we could even think about the AHA post being redundant. That was suggested by someone in the group. So regarding term limits of the board, we agree that every 3 years, board members should be re-nominated or reappointed, and that at the end of the 3-year period, there should be some evaluation process to determine if the board members are working and are doing what they should be doing, are they performing as they should, and if they are not, we should be able to replace them. Regarding the nominees by the Trinidad and Tobago Vet Association, those nominees should be elected by the membership. Regarding the composition of the board, the consensus was that there could be 3 TTVA nominated vets. The rationale for that is that most vets are going to be practitioners, not necessarily working in academia, and therefore the majority of the vets on the board should represent the majority of the vets who are working. There should be 2 minister appointed vets, 1 minister appointed attorney, and an SVM appointed vet on the board. Additional points were raised. Maybe the Act could encourage malpractice insurance, or that the TTVA members or vets practicing generally go after malpractice insurance. We need in the Act perhaps some sort of protection for vets who are working with students. What if a student administers an overdose or performs a surgery and does something that damages a patient? That should be considered. So even where the students are allowed to practice with vets, vets should be granted some sort of protection there. And there should be an option for a provisional or temporary license, as Carla had mentioned, Dr. Georges, regarding vets who come to work for a short period of time, who are coming to work with academic institutions, who are visiting for a period of time to work on certain projects. There should be the opportunity for limited registration and for those persons to pay fees that are reflective of the periods that they work. So that's it for us.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. Dr. Noel.
Hi, good night, everyone. So Group 8 brought up some really good points. We didn't get to finish our discussion, but just to summarize, yes, we agreed with having some sort of veterinary ID for large animal and mobile vets when they go out in the field. So the Act should have something in place for that. We also want to know, the justification for the annual fees, what is being done with these fees. If we know what is being done with it, then, we could justify what would be the actual fees. And we do agree that there should be a different fee for new graduates. The currently registered vets in Trinidad, they should continue with the vet registration. There should be no penalties for the currently registered vets in terms of this Act. So yes, also the animal health assistants and the other paraprofessionals. In the act, it should include what they should and shouldn't do. Some points that we didn't mention. So the sale of veterinary pharmaceuticals and veterinary vaccines, this should be included in the act. The minister shouldn't appoint more than 4 persons. 6 is too much because the vets that he would nominate may be a little bit biased. They may be more large animal vets. They may be more government oriented. What about the veterinarians who do not have a veterinary degree from the SVM? If they are AVME or members of the MRCVS, they have gotten their degree earlier and they have not updated their membership, but they're still practicing in Trinidad. What would be their situation? We need to deal with enforcement with the act. We know that this has been a problem for all of the years. So in the act, we want enforcement of all of these areas to be clearly defined, and also, you know, a justification for paying an increased amount of fees. The veterinarians, we are the ones who we should have more of the power than the minister. He shouldn't, well, the ministry should not be governing the vets. We are the ones who should be governing ourselves. And that's it for my group.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Noel. So just to quickly summarize some of the main points that were mentioned so far by different groups is that 1, the registration fee of $5,000 should be amended, and some have suggested a tiered structure, a tiered structure, and they need to have clarity of what the fees are being used for. Secondly, so far, I think everyone has been in agreement that UE graduates should be allowed to practice without an additional exam. And graduates of a CAM-HP or ACTT college should have the same privileges. There should be an introduction of some sort of standardized price structure. The board composition, as stated in the act, should be adjusted, and we have had numerous suggestions on how that should take change. Continuing education is required. The exact number of credits and all of that still needs to be worked out. There should be some new act laws governing the regulation of the AHAs or the paraprofessionals, so, including some suggested a list of defined tasks that they're allowed to do. Also, the sale of pharmaceuticals needs to be regulated. And another point was that how is the act going to be enforced, right? So those are some of the points that were mentioned already. I'll now call on Dr. Georges. She was a moderator for her group.
Okay, thank you, Anos. So our group reflected several of those points: the tiered approach, regulation of paraprofessionals. We agreed with an odd number, 9 members. We said that the act should address having, if somebody leaves and returns to the country, how would their registration be changed? Or would there be a criteria for that? Again, standardized salaries, standardized clinics as well. In terms of a way for a pathway for reporting infringements, we spoke about nominations to the board. They were saying that the nominees there should be a vote from the membership from the veterinary profession, and not necessarily give the minister the right to just appoint people. There should be a voting process by which members should be nominated, process, and then there's a vote, and then those members are put on the board. We need to have subcommittees to define, to move forward. We need to move have another meeting like this and have consensus to move forward. Okay, we spoke about the pricing guide, as I said before, and we spoke about the roles of the paraprofessionals to be defined. Okay, so, and in terms of membership fees, our group thought about 500, sorry, is better, it's more practical. Okay. So everything you said before was yeah. And of course we said that the section 18.1 should be removed completely. And that is dealing with paraprofessionals practicing veterinary medicine under the oversight of someone. They think that should be moved, that should not be allowed at all. And yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Georges. We move quickly along. Dr. Nirvana Mahaber.
Hi, good day. So I'll try to be quick. So the question, what do you think is a reasonable registration fee? So this was a bit different from what everyone else had to say. There was a consensus that the board should be given their fee of $5,000. And when we asked why is this an issue? First of all, that so many people, so many doctors of veterinary medicine have a problem paying $5,000. That brought up another point, which would be question 8, really, the minimum pricing guide put out by the board to prevent undercutting and preserve the veterinary economy. The point came up as in, why is it so difficult for the average veterinarian to afford $5,000 every 2 years? So we'll answer question 1 and question 8 at the same time with this. And what point brought up in my group, which is group 20, they said that some of them as new grads, they were being paid $4,000 a month TT as their salary. And this to them was diluting the profession. This is not okay, because why would as students in my group as well, why would they want to come out into Trinidad and be paid this salary as a doctor of veterinary medicine? Why would this be the norm? And this is why the issue of $5,000 is such a big deal, because our vets do not get proper salaries. And a board member stated that the $5,000 every 2 years is to pay for the board, is to pay for stuff like rent, stuff like people going to clinics, like the board land regulating stuff that's being done to be done in clinics, etc. $500 to $1,000 would not cover this. Another thing, should UE graduates be required to write foreign exams? So another thing that was different here, generally, if now with people who are already graduated from the vet school, we would say no. However, we disagreed with Professor Simonga here, unfortunately, or fortunately, however we would say that, where UE has put out so many graduates. In the next 2 years, there will be more than 100 graduates coming out in Trinidad to go where. So we're going to say that maybe instead of saying people, existing graduates, have to do a board exam to practice in Trinidad, let's follow SGU and say that maybe a DNAVI or MRCVS should be part of our curriculum itself. So when you graduate UE SBM, you are allowed to practice anywhere else in your group. Number 4, should there be term limits on the members of the registration board? Again, there was some variation here. I know my group is not basically disagreeing with everybody. So we want to have, we have a variety of people on the board, yes, but also the point was brought up, people should be on the board. The people that should be on the board are people that want to be on the board, and people who will show that they are willing to serve, and not just somebody, well, UE says, okay, you go on the board, you are UE's person, but will this person do something just because UE said they should be there? So the board members, we could go through a re-election process maybe, instead of just recycling everybody and saying, okay, your time is up, instead of having like a set term. What are your recommendations for moving forward? So with respect to the quacks in this country and people getting access to vaccines and drugs from wherever, So what option was to speak to the medical distributors and maybe let them know that they should only be selling drugs and vaccines or whatever to people with a valid license as well. And we agree with the fines and the fees with respect to people who do not practice veterinary medicine. They should be fined appropriately with the act. With respect to the paraprofessionals, they should not be allowed to perform surgeries on their own. And another thing was brought up where if we have a qualified vet tech to assist in doing certain procedures, like only a qualified veterinary technician as opposed to a sister or something, assisting in a surgery. But then with that, why would a vet tech want to work in a clinic when a vet makes $4,000 a month in some places? So that's an issue. Why would somebody with another whole other degree want to work and get that from that salary? Surgeries should be done in a clinic, not in someone's kitchen. That was a point brought up. Large animals, surgeries are done in field conditions, and this is unique to the field of large animals. Small animal surgery should be done under proper sanitation, proper filters, etc. I think that's about covers it. Yep, that's it for this group. Please, thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Marver. It's good that this is why we have consultation, so we have varying views. That's very good. Next, we call on Dr. Sant. She could tell us what her group came up with.
Good night, everyone. In terms of the first question, if there's a reasonable registration fee to pay per year, the group that I had, they suggested basically a 40th system where there was a waiver of fees for new grads up to the first year. From year 2 to 5 years, basically a registration fee of 300 to 500. From 5 years to 10 years, 500 to 1,000, and more than 10 years, basically 1,000 to 2,000. And they said that these fee structures should be held for 5 years and then they could be revised after 5 years. In terms of UE graduates being required to write foreign board exams, they said that no, because UE basically, one of the objectives is to produce competent vets, and they have basically completed and passed a qualifying final year exam, which would allow them to practice veterinary medicine and surgery. In terms of changes that they would like to see in the legislation, basically was mentioned before, so they wanted to know evidence to report the sales of vaccine, prescribed drugs by pet stores, hardwares, and pharmaceutical companies. So they wanted to make sure that pharmaceutical companies were also included in there as well. And they wanted to know how it would be implemented and the fines as well as who they can make their reports to. In terms of the term limits on the members of the registration board, they were in agreement with the recommendations with 3 years with possibility of return for a consecutive term, but they should not be allowed to have more than 2 consecutive terms. In terms of the recommendation on the composition of the board, they found also that 9 members were too much, and they suggested a total of 5 to 7 members of varied backgrounds. So they wanted someone at least with an animal welfare background, food animal background, public health background. They suggested 1 to 2 persons from UE, 3 members from TTVA, and at least 1 vet from the private sector. The minister should only be allowed to elect up to 1 to 2 persons, and they say that the president of TTVA should be allowed to nominate at least 1 member to the board. Recommendations in moving forward, they also wanted to know whether we should have invited lecturers from UTT teaching animal production courses, whether they should also have an input in this discussion. They wanted to know specifically with the penalties, especially for in terms of a time period for paying fees, what will be the penalty for not paying fees within a specific time period, etc. And they also found that the penalties that was suggested was a bit steep. Also one of the points that was mentioned was that the legislation should separate the registration of vets from the licensing of vets by continuing education credits, and they wanted a bit more clarity in terms of the frequency of the amount of credits needed to maintain their license. And that basically was the majority of the, what was discussed. They also agreed with the minimum pricing guide, but one of the points that was brought up in my group was how it would affect the veterinary teaching hospital and or NCRHA, because like some of the surgeries that they suggested were basically free. So how it would affect them as well as like the spay and neuter drives. So that was basically all from my group.
Okay, thanks very much, Candice. So in the interest of time, I'll just ask, I know a lot of points have been repeated in different groups. So I'm gonna ask if any moderators have any points that were different in their groups that they'd like to highlight. Any of the other moderators?
Hi, Anil, Stacy here.
Hi, Stacy.
I'll be very short. We had much of the same discussion as Rod and Natasha, Mutu, and Mark and Paul. The only difference is we talked about how is the act going to be regulated. Something came up about punishment of people giving advice on Facebook, because it does specify that on the act, that giving advice is contrary to the act. We had an animal health assistant in our group, and she was suggesting to even have an animal health assistant on the board itself. And she was talking about separate registration for animal health assistants and to be covered under our act. And only one other thing is that to provide a list of continuous education sources, approved accredited sources. And that was pretty much it that was different. Oh, one more thing. With regards to punishment of people that would probably have their license revoked, is that if they were to be let back into the profession, to have some sort of rehab for them. So some sort of course that they needed to go through in order for them to be able to practice again. And that's pretty much it in terms of differences.
Okay, all right, thanks very much.
Sure.
Dr. Nanan?
Well, yeah.
Good night, all. Keeping it short, with respect to, there was a unanimous agreement of 500 to 1,000 per year. However, it was noted that we should be extra careful about the tiering process or stratification with respect to the pricing, because this pricing pertains mainly to being able to practice veterinary medicine in Trinidad, and having or holding a higher degree isn't necessarily correlated with being more employable or having a higher salary. And that was for pricing. So with respect to paraprofessionals, it was noted that it should be definitely defined, but we couldn't come to what exactly it should be. However, it was suggested that we should have some sort of identification for the paraprofessionals, whoever they may be. And it was suggested that because AHAs are present for mainly large animal work, maybe there can be some involvement, maybe short courses for small animal focused courses, let's say. Yes, in addition to that, it was agreed that there should be a minimum pricing guide, but it was debatable whether or not the board themselves should regulate the prices, because it was sort of uncertain how that would work with the board frequently changing and how often they would be able to regulate the prices in that regard. With respect to continuous education, we had members who attempted to do 50 hours per year already, and they found it to be exhausting. So we wanted to include to suggest a 5 hour per month max. So we'll have a minimum amount, but keep it less than 5. That's just a suggestion on our end. And with respect to not only impersonating that, but it was noted in some experiences that our documents aren't necessarily recognized as legal, such as our vaccination cards and our clinic documents. So they wanted an inclusion of that in the law as well for our documents specifically, and to be able to differentiate that from animal health assistants and other paraprofessionals such as breeders, etc. And that is it.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nanan. Would any of the moderators like to contribute? Dr. Mellos? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so just different from other people. There is a definition of paraprofessionals already done in the Animal Diseases Importation and Welfare Act that was proclaimed in June this year. There's a definition in there already. So the same definition can be used here, as well as there should be a definition of what we mean by CE credit somewhere in the definitions. We agree with having paraprofessionals being regulated, but we do think it will be kind of difficult, even if you had categories of what they can and cannot do, but we do think they should be regulated in some kind of way. We do think that foreign vets should take an exam, given that we have different laws here and different diseases, so they should take exams to ensure that they can practice here, at least be able to have the knowledge to practice here. There was some disagreement whether we should list the schools or not list the schools, but again, I guess we'll just go with the whatever decision comes up in the end. As well as, I'm just trying to, right. When you're applying for your license, the time periods that the board, there's no good time period given for the board to reply to you. So they must look at this in 10 days, but they don't say whether they should respond to you in a year, 2 years, 6 months, never. That should be listed, and we were suggesting after they look at that, they have to respond within 4 weeks maximum, okay? And then when you have your license, it can be published in the Gazette, but it should be published in somewhere also that is public, because most of us do not look at the Gazettes. So in addition to being gazetted, which has to be by law, you should also consider things like newspapers or in some other kind of format where more people will see that kind of information. And we agree with the tiered system for new graduates having less fees to pay, and older ones more. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Mellos. We look any of the other moderators?
Dr. Bazan?
Yes.
Go ahead, Dr. Sami.
No, I'll be quick. Apart from what was already said, I'll just make brief points. Our group agree with tier system. We do want to be clear of qualifications of the secretary and different members of the board. For the second question, we don't agree that we should be given an exam. If you have already passed the foreign board exam, then you can, but if not, if you're not from an accredited school, a local exam should be done by either the board or School of Veterinary Medicine. We do want, for number 3, we do want to clarify, they understood the fit, but what about the proper part? With respect to ethics, they don't want pet shops to be selling any pet products or medication. Only qualified persons. A hefty fine should be placed and enforced. We do want the term limits to be between 3-5 years, but majority was 3. For number 5, we wanted a TTVA representative, but up for nominations. And we wanted to, for number 6, we wanted to clarify if advertisements were allowed for veterinarians. We've had many discussions about that being done, and we're starting to see a trend in veterinary or our profession advertising whether surgeries or products at a competitive price. We do need clarification on CE credits, how many total annually, how is it being monitored? Should be less than what is offered by the vet schools so that we can be able to do it. And we support the list of getting paraprofessionals, but one of the things mentioned by a large animal is that piglets being done by farmers, which does not involve any anesthesia, that those are things to consider while doing up this list, and while we agree for a minimum fee across the board overall. But I'll send it in an email as well.
Okay, thanks very much. And you'll have Davina, Dr. Supersad, and then if the other moderators don't have anything else, we could wrap up and move on to the other section of the program.
Okay, good night, and thank you, Dr. Basad. So the points are fairly similar to the rest. However, just a few points I'll raise. The tier system was discussed in our group, approximately 1,000 to 1,500, approximately 3 years and less. They could pay $1,000, 3 to 5 years, $1,200, and 5 years, $1,500. Someone also posed a question, since the veterinary market is being saturated with a lot of graduates, and they may not have a job at the time. So if the graduates are now come out and they'll be 6 months into the year, so the other 6 months they could probably pay a fee of $500. That was just a suggestion. Someone also asked, yes, you are a graduate with UE, however, you're not practicing. You need to still register annually, and what's the cost? Would it be the same? And someone asked, who the fees are paid to? Is it the board, and what it would be spent on? Another question posed was to prevent undercutting and preserve the veterinary economy. A lot of us agreed standardization for the veterinary costs for their services. For the board exams to practice in Trinidad, 100% said no. However, suggestion was made of a temporary internship license under the supervision of a senior vet. And someone also posed, however, right. So for the veterinary quacks, in inverted commas, they must bring awareness, especially to pet shops that sell illicit drugs too. And if someone reports it, for example, if a vet reports it, who are they reporting it to? And would it be confidential? Because it must be confidential, right? And another point is they raised the question of at least 9 members in the board. However, just to distribute responsibilities, because they will also have subcommittees. So therefore, at least around the quorum should have 5 to 7 people for meetings. So always an odd number, not an even, so that you will prevent any biasness. And basically, someone raised a point, the Veterinary Association must be mandatory, especially if they are the ones who are policing the acts, or policing the force for these acts, right? Someone also posed that the ethics committee is also a focus, because not only for veterinary quacks, but also for veterinarians who are doing illegal activities. That's basically some of my points there. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks so much, Davina. Anne-Marie, Dr. Hussein.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Good night, everyone. One of the things my group had is some graduates that are practicing abroad, and one of the things they wanted to also look at with respect to registration is that there be a nominal fee to maintain registration, and then a separate fee for practicing. What they were saying is that in those countries, there is a fee for practicing, which is a much more substantial fee, as against a nominal fee for someone who may be abroad, or someone who has retired and just probably potter around and do a few things. So they're looking at practicing fee vis-a-vis a nominal fee, as well as a registration fee. So that's one of the topics my group was interested in. With respect to should UE graduates be required to write foreign exams, they 100% no. We rather us we registered without that. However, there was a point made that Jamaica does do an exam for graduates coming into their country, and we were also one of our members spoke about a CARICOM type exam that at some point they were considering. So I'm not sure if that's still being considered. They were also talking about what change they want to see in the proposed legislation. One of the things they were saying is that the ethics part of the law, there should be a clear code of ethics, because the Vet Association has a particular code, and then we may have the board with another code, and we're not sure how that will work. So if in the regulations, the specific ethics would be defined, and the regulations, or there's a document, so people know in terms of ethics what is there. So clearly state that, right? One of our members who has a disability was saying that, you know, somebody who in a wheelchair vis-a-vis somebody who can walk, there may be different competencies in terms of practicing. So that might be something you may want to consider. Also, if somebody can speak English, as again, someone who speaks a foreign language, that might be something that we need to look at. But I know that it's there somewhere in the new bill. Another thing the group was looking at is the vagueness of the original law, you know, because the board, the old law, whether the board has ever revoked someone's license, they were questioning that. With respect to the veterinary surgeons revoking of the license, we were looking at maybe there may be, in terms of like a fine, and there's a grading of the fine. And if for example, somebody license would be revoked, maybe you could look at it on a case-by-case basis. Suppose someone did something that was really a serious crime, there may be different cases or different responses as to the type of crime and whether they could be revoked immediately or suspended immediately. So that's a little different to what people talked about. Should there be term limits on the board? They agreed yes, because the current board, sometimes people are there for life, and I think that was mentioned before. And that the board members should set rules for disciplinary action. That may be something to consider. With respect to the composition of the board, our group looked at, yes, they wanted an odd number, but they're looking at 7. They feel that 7 is a good number. The part about the new graduates with the tiered system, I think Rennie had asked about that for us to discuss that. They agreed, yes, we could have a tiered system for the new grad, as again, somebody in the different 3 to 5 years to 10 years. So that's something we want to look at. What generated quite a bit of discussion is the paraprofessionals as well. Like the animal health assistants and veterinary technicians, where we are aware that in the US and other countries, there are veterinary nurses, and people have like different certificates, like maybe a year or 2 years or 3 years they've done this particular course. So depending on how long in terms of their certification, perhaps they should be guided as to what they can and cannot do. For example, someone talked about you may be able to just take out the medication or just restrain the dog, for example, but not be able to actually give an injection. And that will depend on what type of certification you have. So that's something a little different of what other people commented on. The other one with respect to whether they would support making a list of activities that assistants are not allowed to perform. So that takes care of that. And the other one, if vets would support a minimum pricing guide, they said yes. But what if would action be taken if someone, say, charged a different price? And how frequently would they like review this particular price guide? Because as you know, medication goes up fairly often. So that is one of the concerns, whether or not that would happen. And okay, another thing, the vet technicians, they wanted to know, well, what qualifies a technician? Is it 1-year training? Is it 2-year trainings? Or whether the school may be willing, and I think somebody mentioned that before, if the school will be willing to do some sort of accreditation or courses based on the certification, say the technician may have, whether that person may have had a year, and there's some sort of certification by the vet school. And I think that's about it. Oh, one last thing. one of our members wanted to find out what were the shortcomings in the current law presently that we cannot enforce, right? So that's something that that we wanted to consider. And going forward, another thing was asked is, how do you re-register after a period of dormancy? Let us say you were out of the country, and that should be defined. I think that's it, basically. If I have anything else, I will send it to you by email. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Hussein. So in the chat, I saw a lot of chatter going on. So what I could ask you all to do is go ahead and email any further comments that you all have to the email addresses provided. I will now hand you all back over to Dr. Morris.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for all those comments, and hopefully our voice will be heard. So I just wanted to say that, as I said, in our audience, we are pleased to have Dr. Mandisa Green, who is the president of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. And she's still awake, although it's 1 o'clock in the morning in the UK. So we just like to, a lot of the things that we are going through, they probably have, well, they've gone through up in the UK. So I'd just like to welcome her to make some comments, and she could probably give us some things to add. Dr. Green.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. It is actually 20 to 3 in the morning. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Morris, Dr. Georges, all the colleagues for allowing us all to have the opportunity to be involved in these discussions. I really enjoyed it. And as Dr. Morris said, we have, these are a lot of the things that we have gone through and are still going through, because I think as time changes and people and practice evolves, it's important that regulation also evolves with it as well. So it's a really important time, and I encourage you all to make some really bold and ambitious changes, because the decisions that you're making now are not only affecting us all, but also the next generation of vets. So I think that's really, really important to try to be as bold and ambitious as you can, so that the changes that are made now will stand the test of time. I think ultimately, I think Dr. George has said it, but any decisions that are made should ultimately be in the interest of increasing the public confidence in our profession, and also as a result increase animal health and welfare as a result. So I think those are really important things to do. I think it sounds like the discussions are going really, really well. Everybody has such vibrant and vital inputs to make. So I'm really happy to be involved in the discussions going forward. And thank you very much. Good night.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Green, for your input. I'd just like to ask Dr. Georges to make some last closing comments, and then Dr. Prasad for the vote of thanks. Dr. Georges.
Okay, so I would say that we are very thrilled with the turnout, very thrilled with the engagement, and of course we don't want it to stop there. What we plan to do is, as one of my groups suggested, that we have to have a way to move forward, meeting with the subcommittees and meeting with the TTVA and the board. I want to say, of course, special thank you to Dr. Mandisa Green for your words of encouragement to our veterinarians, and to be really happy that you're taking the time to even speak with us and engage with us tonight. And of course, I don't want to keep you all too long, so I just want to put you on to Dr. Prasad to close the session, and we'll definitely keep everybody posted in the upcoming weeks. And we need your input moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Georges. So I'd first like to thank Prof. Simongal for giving his comments at the beginning of the talk. Especially like to thank Dr. Georges, Raghubar, and Dr. Morris for their hard work in organizing this consultation. We'd also like to thank Ms. Wendy Maynard and Chelsea Sitahal from Marketing and Communications We have had them busy for the last week, with emails going back and forth, trying to ensure that we have this webinar set up as best as possible to allow as much opinion to be generated and expressed. I would like to thank all the vets and vet students who came out today. At one point, we had over 260 odd vets and vet students present. So there's a tremendous support that was shown. And yes, we will take all the views that have been given seriously. We have an email address, 3 email addresses that were posted in the chat. We ask you all to please continue to send your comments. What we will do next is compile all the comments that were made that were recorded by the moderators, and then we'll have a common document that we can move forward with. Okay. So I wish you all a good night and hope you all continue to be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night all.